Hi, everyone. This is acyuta-bhava from Nightlight Astrology. Happy Monday. Happy solar eclipse in Sagittarius today. We are going to continue exploring the eclipse today by taking it through the 12 houses according to your rising sign. So that's on the agenda for today. We're also going to answer a couple of questions that I received over the weekend from people who had emailed me about the eclipse. I'm going to take a look at what it means to have the eclipse on the angles, any of the angles, the ascendant, the descendant, the midheaven, or the IC, as well as the angular houses in general. And we'll also take a look at what it means if you are experiencing a nodal return or a reverse nodal return. So those are a few of the things we'll take a look at today. Meanwhile, I want to let you all know that we are now just 6 backers shy of beating last year's backer total in my annual Kickstarter. I really can't believe it. We're just a little over halfway through, and we're just about to eclipse last year's record, no pun intended. So 6 backers left. I'd love to get across the finish line today if possible. Remember that when you donate and support my work, you're supporting a staff of 3 different people who help me year round, and you're supporting this channel day in and day out. Average over the past 6 to 7 years, 7 years of doing this now, an average of 300 plus posts a year on daily astrological forecasting and all other kinds of astrological content. So if you like this channel, if you subscribe to it, if you share it, if you learn something from it regularly, I really appreciate your support. Any and every donation amount really helps us. And yeah, I just couldn't do this without such a great audience. And I'm really glad that people like it. So I also, during this last 40 days, I take time, I go into a more focused period of prayer and reflection, a little bit like the series I did on the 10 things I've learned in 10 years. And I start reflecting on what I learned in 2020 about myself as an astrologer, about astrology. What do I want to get better at? And so forth, and just kind of set intentions for the year ahead. So during this time, if you can't donate, throw up a prayer that this channel would keep reaching people in a positive way, and that I would get better at what I do. And really appreciate that as well. When you donate, remember you can pick up a whole ton of different rewards. There's some reward readings. I think one of them sold out now. There are lots of different bonus lectures that I have available, like, for example, the Astrology of 2021 deep dive. That's in there. And you can also pick up half off to any of my online training programs in 2021, including the courses that start this spring in June, a new 1-year Ancient Astrology for the Modern Mystic course, and my 2nd year program and my horary program. You can bundle them together and save as well. My wife's also got her herbal apprenticeship program for any of you who follow her channel. You guys know Ashley, she comes on and we talk herbs and astrology once in a while. So wow, can't believe it. Well, this is an exciting day. I feel really excited today because it's also my daughter's birthday. So I am finishing up my work early today, and she's got a really cute dress. We're going to go, there's not a lot to do with COVID, unfortunately. So we're going out to see a Christmas light display at the Minnesota Zoo here, which is going to be awesome. And yeah, just gonna eat some cake tonight and open some presents. I'm really stoked. And it's kind of surreal, honestly, to be looking at as an astrologer, to be watching my daughter age, because it's like, well, it's like front and center for seeing how the karma in a birth chart evolves and develops in terms of personality and in terms of, innate gifts and strengths and challenges. And yeah, it's really cool learning how to be a dad as I go along and watching her grow and knowing something of her birth chart. It's a balance between not paying attention to her birth chart and just being an organic dad, and then like tuning in a little bit here or there to try to get some ideas about how I can help and be a better parent. So it's like it's interesting. I would look at a solar return for just about anyone, but knowing that there's an eclipse today on my daughter's birthday and knowing where it lands, it's funny because I can see how things are playing out, and then I'm like, I'm just not even going to look. So I've done some talks in the past where I actually talk about whether to do astrology for little kids or not, how often, and stuff like that. And I remember I've said this a bunch. I recommend a light touch. I didn't look at either of my children's birth chart, either of my daughters, until they were a year old. I didn't even look at it. And then when they were a year, I opened it and, took a look at the charts. But that was one of the best decisions I ever made. And I encourage parents to do the same thing if you're into astrology. All right, anyway, let's go ahead and dive into today's eclipse. Sorry, I've got to gush a little bit on my daughter's birthday here. First of all, let's talk about the eclipse again. This is a solar eclipse that is happening in close proximity to the south node of the moon. Now, I covered the meaning of this on Friday's talk on the eclipse, so go back and check that out if you want a little bit more of a deeper dive into what that means. But that's where we're starting from. So the starting point, to sort of re-summarize, would be you've got a new beginning powered by a new moon, but it's a mega new beginning. It's like you got everyday average waves coming in on the beach, and then you get supersets. And this is like the part of the superset of waves that's been coming through in eclipse season lately. You've got a really strong, powerful chapter change that's going to happen for everyone. It doesn't affect everyone the same because it really depends on what house it's falling in, if it's connecting to planets or not in your chart. If this new moon taking place at about 23 degrees of Sagittarius, if that 23 degree marker falls within, let's say, 3 degrees of a natal planet in conjunction, that's going to be at the top of your list. And what it means is that whatever the planet represents in your chart, it can represent a variety of different things depending on what houses it rules, what natural significations the planet has. Like Venus could represent love, but Venus could also represent the third house of siblings. So you have to understand the variety of topics that the planet may be representing, and then think to yourself, there is a significant turning point with regard to that karma and these topics in my life, and that turning point is specifically going to be like a chapter change that emphasizes a new beginning. Beginnings and endings are funny things because they come right on top of each other, but typically you're thinking about a new era. This falls in line with the new era that we have starting with the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in Aquarius in just about a week from now. So there's a lot of newness in the air coming through pretty quick here. Now, with the South Node in the mix, remember that the South Node is a little otherworldly. It tends to emphasize imagination, fantasy, spirit, detachment. It doesn't love the world so much. It loves other worlds, or it wants to escape from the entanglements of the world, or prefers to be more disembodied in both positive and negative ways. The South Node can lead you to meditation. The South Node is something that can also point toward drug use and escapism. And these are, I take the South Node meanings from the Indian tradition. I find that they are the most accurate. Even in the ancient Western tradition, the South Node would be sort of Saturnine and about a sort of winter or melancholic state, diminishing, declining. There can be losses around the South Node. So you've got a new chapter change born of an otherworldliness or something diminishing or downsizing, or even certain kinds of losses. So that doesn't have to be negative, right? Remember that this South Node eclipse in Sagittarius it's hosted by a fallen Jupiter that is about to change signs in the anaretic degrees here. Literally, we'll be moving into the anaretic degree today and tomorrow. And that's the last degree of Capricorn. And then it will change signs and conjoin with Saturn in a week from now. So I mentioned this last week as well. We're talking about a loss, potentially, a diminishment, something. We talked about potential losses and even deaths or significant changes related to sun stuff or solar figures. But then there's kind of a new beginning that's born. We're going to see, for example, today, one thing that's happening that is going to, mark a major turning point is going to be I believe the Electoral College is meeting today to certify the election here in the U.S. So that's happening in President-elect Joe Biden's first house, right? First whole sign house, pretty close to a lot of victory in his chart, if I remember correctly. So, and he's expected, as last I heard, he's expected to be certified. So at any rate, politics aside, that's the mood of this eclipse, a major turning point, a new beginning, but it's born of some pain or loss, potentially, because we've got a little bit of a dinged up Jupiter, but changing signs quickly. We've got the South Node, which tends to diminish or almost take us out of this world somehow. All right, so let's start interpreting this. And first thing I want to do is mention the angles. And again, if you have it conjoined a planet, that's top of your list. If you got the eclipse anywhere from say 20 to 26 of Sagittarius, if you have a planet anywhere between 20 to 26 of Sagittarius in your birth chart, that's kind of I would put that as a big deal, right? People will ask, what about squares or oppositions? I don't find that the squares or oppositions are nearly as impactful as direct conjunctions. But you could throw them in there, and then you would have, say squares or oppositions to 20 to 26 of any of the mutable signs, which include Pisces, Virgo, and Gemini. Beyond this, what we want to understand is what happens when these planets get into angular houses, and the four angles. So if you end up having, let's say, I'm just going to let's get the midheaven right on the eclipse. So if this is what your chart looks like, if you have the eclipse right on the MC, let's talk about that one first. This is going to pertain to some people, not a lot of people, but I had a lot of questions come in about the angles. So we're going to talk about the 10th house and the midheaven at the same time. So the 10th whole sign house was called praxis by ancient Greek astrologers, and literally means, what do you do? What do you do out in the world or civilization that you belong to? What are the actions that you take according to the ambitions that you have out in the world? And it's got a little bit of like a social connotation to it. It's called karma by Indian astrologers, which also, like praxis, means action. Action and reaction. What kind of results are you going to get in the world based on what kind of actions you take? So if you have a solar eclipse falling in your 10th house, you're going to get a strong emphasis on changes in your career, or your work in the world, or the overall direction that your life is taking in terms of your reputation, or what kind of activities you perform in the society that you live in. And if it's conjoined to the specific degree of the midheaven, there's a slight difference. The degree of the midheaven is not necessarily the same as the topical significations of the 10th house. The degree of the midheaven is a bit more like in Mario Brothers, where you're running around and then you might find a mushroom, and then Mario gets really big, or maybe you find a flower and then he can spit fire or something like that. The midheaven is like a power-up bar. If you have a planet at that degree, what you're going to get is a power-up for that planet. So when an eclipse conjoins the midheaven, it means that the kinds of changes that are going to happen signified by the eclipse are going to take on a lot more prominence. They're being greatly amplified. It's like an eclipse on steroids. And it's going to be more public or visible, the way, not just you become more public or visible, but the results of the eclipse in your life will become more tangible, more visible, and usually in a more external way. And it doesn't mean it happens right away, because it's planting a seed that will manifest in time in a very external, visible, and very amplified manner. So just think of almost like a spotlight, right? The spotlight on a stage is if the eclipse is happening, but it's not it's in the 10th, but it's not conjoined to say that degree of the midheaven. It could be that the eclipse is center stage, but the spotlight is not additionally on the eclipse on the center stage. You see what I'm saying? So if you end up having an eclipse right in the midheaven, you're putting the spotlight right on, and you're also right on the stage where everyone can see. So it's an amplifying factor. And that's typically something that people misunderstand about the midheaven. They'll think that the midheaven is a degree that determines something about your career. And it's not. It's a degree that does something to planets if they are near it, which is to say it elevates them and it puts them up on high. And that can mean a lot of different things. So the eclipse here, this would be if you're a Pisces rising, right? So if you're a Pisces rising, you're going to find that the eclipse is landing in your 10th house. I'm going to go through the angles first, and then I'll go through the other houses. So if you're a Pisces rising, you've got this landing in your 10th house. And if it conjoins the midheaven, just think about this being really amplified. I would think of things, of there being pretty significant changes in your career if you're a Pisces rising. This is a pretty powerful eclipse, but perhaps with either an emphasis on something imaginative or otherworldly, or perhaps there could also be an emphasis on some changing of the guard that's not altogether easy. Remember, this is not the world's easiest eclipse due to the South Node, the debilitated Jupiter, but it will lead to some kind of new beginning in time that will probably be more favorable. And so that's the way that I would read this, just very basically, if you're a Pisces rising and have this in your 10th. All right, so let's take this down to the 7th. Now, if you have if this eclipse is falling in your 7th house, let's see, I'm going to put the descendant, I'm going to just keep bringing the descendant up so that you can see what would happen if we put it on the descendant. Now, this is if you're a Gemini rising. We're going to take this into the 7th house, which is an angular house, so it's also very busy and active. Now, if you were to have the eclipse falling on the descendant in your chart, the degree of the Western setting place, you're talking about a critical degree that signifies endings, resolution, completion, finality, death, finishing things, because this is where planets set. It is not identical to the topic of marriage. Planets around the descendant tend to signify resolution, completion, closure, endings, death, etc. So an eclipse around that degree that is a new moon eclipse with the South Node is probably going to speak to somewhat more challenging or even painful endings of one kind or another. It doesn't have to be related to love or relationships, just completion of something. Maybe a little bit challenging with the South Node involved. And again, with Jupiter in its fall, Jupiter in your fall happens to be in the 8th house as well. But it could be metaphorical too, the death or conclusion of something in life that you've been attached to, working on, obsessed with. It doesn't necessarily have to be a person dying or passing away or something like that, but you're thinking of an ending that also stands in and leads to some very significant chapter change in your life. We're talking about a very significant form of ending, so powerful that it plants the seed for something new, if it's right around the descendant in your chart. So that'd be the descendant's going to be at about 23 degrees Sagittarius. Now, if it's in the 7th house in general, you're talking more broadly about, and this would be if you're Gemini rising, you're talking about relationships and love, marriage, but not just love and marriage, also the kind of feedback that you're getting from the world socially, from others in general. And something other than ourselves is needed in life. We can't live completely self-absorbed or self-centered lives. It doesn't bring us joy or happiness, right? So a new beginning in the 7th house, even if it's born of some of the challenges of the South Node, could bring a very spiritual person into your life, like a spiritual teacher or a spiritual partner or a spiritual lover. That's the kind of South Node influence. I would want to be careful about people or influences coming into your life that, what do I want to say, that encourage or promote escapism or something that's unhealthy, like a deep, something that's like, say, running with the wrong crowd that does drugs, when you're in high school or something like that. So you want to be careful of that the South Node people coming into your life, because that will be a part of this, aren't people that want you to check out somehow. On the other hand, anybody coming into your life that promotes spirituality, imagination, again, there could be a really nice pairing in that regard. So you just have to be a little discerning. But also, again, a new beginning that I think probably for Geminis has something to do with the return or further development of a faith or spirituality that maybe has been on the back burner, because you're going to see that Jupiter Saturn jump into the 9th house right away. So spiritual people entering your life is a strong one, I think, for Geminis right now. Anyway, okay, let's take this down to the 4th house, and that's for Gemini's Gemini rising. Whoops. We're going to take this all the way down. Oops, here we go. Now, I'm going to have to actually set this back a day just to give you a better feeling for it. So if you have the IC at about 23 Sagittarius, and you get the eclipse also in the 4th house, and remember, the MC and IC will not always be aligned in ancient astrology use of whole sign houses with the 10th and the 4th. They can float freely between the 11th, 10th, and 9th, or the 3rd, 4th, and 5th typically. But at any rate, if you are a Virgo rising and you have this eclipse in your 4th house, you're thinking of potential. This is one where I would see potential losses in the family, like deaths in the family, especially probably older people passing away, grandparents, father figures, karma around father figures and ancestry, where you live, changes in housing, buying or selling land or property, legacies and estates and wills. There's a signature here of the potential. Remember, the 4th house is the subterranean place, as the IC. The IC is going to represent things that are deep, things that are hidden, things that are kind of have this underworld, subterranean mysteriousness to them, or they may act as a very deep internal resource or kind of deep foundational place of support in the chart. The 4th house can represent that too, but the 4th house more broadly can also represent family, father, etc. I think of the IC as a little bit more like a deep, like going deep below into the earth, and it's kind of like this. If you ever saw The Hobbit, the movies that came out, there was the Arkenstone, which was the stone that was the heart of the mountain. It was like this amazingly rich thing that gave all the power to the mountain, but it also it drove the dwarf king crazy when he tried to take it for himself. There's something very mysterious and magical about the IC, and yet there's something that can almost represent like the madness of our families or our karmas, or there's sometimes like even like greed, and it's a weird degree. It's very like I want to say that it's an occult degree. Anyway, and the 4th house was traditionally associated with the mysteries, with mystery schools and things like that. So if you have it near the IC, I would think that this is going to not be it's not going to be made visible right away. That this new beginning is in a very, very deep place. It's going to take a while for it to develop, but it may manifest through those broader topics of the 4th house in general: family, home, property, land, foundational elements that support us or hold up our lives, and changes therein with some loss potentially. So that's something, just to, prepare yourself for. I don't think you have to prepare for devastation or, total tragedy, but there can be generational changeover. There can be, the way that we die is in moments. It's not just the literal death. It's the changes that start taking place when parents get older. It's the changes that take place when we move away from a childhood home, or, you know what I mean? So, but look for very foundational level change with some aura of diminishment or loss that leads to a new beginning. Now, the other thing about the 4th house in the South Node is that, remember, this is a very mystical South Node that implies otherworldliness. And so because the 4th house was associated with the mysteries, this is another one where I could see things becoming quite spiritual, or a person taking a step into another world somehow. In fact, come to think of it, one of the things that I'm that I'm doing for my daughter is one of the gift that I'm giving her is when she was in the womb, I read the whole Narnia Chronicles to her. My wife had never read them either, so I would read like every night over 9 months. I would read little pieces out of the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe and all the books, and we went through all of them, and I read to her like in the womb. So she's been wanting to read them again, but she doesn't really quite have the patience for, things that aren't picture books. So that's her birthday gift because she's been wanting it for so long. So we'll be starting to read The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Now, that might seem like a really minuscule thing, but if you see that coinciding with an eclipse on your birthday and you're 5 years old, imagine what impact your first fantasy book series with your dad could have on you. You're talking about the House of Father. You're talking about a place that has to do with mysteries, the South Node that has to do with fantasy, imagination, spirituality. So my point is that it could be very subtle shift that's happening. It could also be pretty deeply spiritual, or and with an emphasis on things that are mysterious or very, very imaginative. So watch for those kind of esoteric themes or symbols. I'm also like, I look at her and I go like, I'm in good health, but she has grandparents, grandfathers, and so forth that aren't necessarily all in the greatest shape. COVID's around, so it's a year where I see that I don't go, oh yeah, that someone's going to die, but I say, well, it, it's potential that there's change. Now we're also going to be moving, right? We just sold our house, like we're in Minnesota, we've got to find our own place. We're in this rental for now, right? So there's change that can happen. Like I'm looking at my daughter's chart and going like, oh yeah, it looks like we're going to move again, and that's not going to happen right away. So the eclipses also take a while to play out. You always got to keep that in mind. Anyway, hopefully this is giving you guys some things to some constructive things to think about. All right, so let's take this into the first house. If you are a Sagittarius rising and it's on your ascendant, the ascendant is not the same as the first house. If you have the ascendant at 23 Sagittarius, here it's at 6, but imagine you had it at 23. Actually, maybe I can push it there. Let's see. Yeah, there we go. So the ascendant is not the same as the first house. There are some differences, namely that at the ascendant, planets appear for the first time. And so something is being born, something is appearing. So it is associated with inceptions, beginnings, appearances of things in your life. If you have an eclipse right on your ascendant, of course, it can be associated with, it already is a solar eclipse associated with new beginnings. It's that much more powerful and pronounced and personal when it's on your ascendant degree. It can also be pointing toward that something that you're going to start through your own power, your own abilities, like a business. Now, the first house also, broadly speaking, can pertain to health or vitality. Eclipses on the ascendant can be signs or omens of health challenges. For example, when I did the election astrology and I saw that Joe Biden has the solar eclipse in his first house right now, I said, he's got in his chart, he's got Jupiter and Saturn about to square the moon in the 6th house and Pluto about to pose Jupiter in the 8th, and that's his ascendant ruler. Like he has the signatures in his solar return chart too for the year, which we looked at in one of my classes over the weekend. He has the signatures of potential real health challenges in his horoscope for the next year. Right after I said that, and I said he's kind of in a vulnerable period. I think he sprained his ankle or something, and he had a boot on. So it doesn't have to be the world's most devastating stuff, but eclipses in your first house can bring on challenges in health or the need to reform or, a turning point for you in health. I've seen people start diets or start getting in shape or lose weight. Certainly eclipses in the first house can be a turning point of one kind or another. Well, this is a south node solar eclipse with a little bit of a devastating Jupiter underneath it, right? So some challenges around health that lead to a healthy turnaround. That's the kind of sequence that you could see here. But also a new beginning born of financial challenges or difficulties that you try to get something going, something new started. That would make sense too, especially since the fallen Jupiter is in your second house, but both Jupiter and Saturn are about to get out of your second house of finances after being there a long time. So some kind of financial turnaround wouldn't be completely unexpected either. All right, so that's if you're a Sagittarius rising. Now, and that's these just a brief rundown of what you could expect if you saw it on the ascendant. It usually has something to do with the starting point of a new enterprise. It can also literally coincide with conception or birth of a child. So that's interesting to think about as well. Sometimes you can, like in the Sagittarius eclipse, you can see that there's a trine to Mars in the 5th house of children and pregnancy. Could there be some kind of new beginning here born of something to do with children or pregnancy? That would be a possibility as well. So full analysis requires quite a lot of time, right? So we're just kind of breaking it down simply today. All right, we did all the mutable signs. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take a look at all the cardinal signs, and then we're going to do all the fixed signs. All right, so first we're going to put Aries on the ascendant. And if you are an Aries rising, and I use whole sign houses, I encourage everybody to use whole sign houses. And in general, I recommend your rising sign for all horoscopes because it's going to sync up with your birth chart. And it may not sync up perfectly if you use a quadrant-based system like Placidus, but if you use a whole sign system, it'll be really close. At least the houses will be on track with your birth chart. So if you're an Aries rising, you've got this we're going to see your solar eclipse in the ninth house, the place that was called God and the joy of the sun, a place that is associated with wisdom and truth and understanding, ethics, law, politics, philosophy, beliefs. Also travel to foreign places and pilgrimages. So these are the kinds of themes that are going to be really prominent. And with a south node eclipse in that house, I'm looking at some kind of very deep religious and spiritual transformation for Aries rising individuals. So that's my brief breakdown. And I apologize because the angles are going to get a little bit more treatment than everyone else today. And that's just a result of the fact that I got so many questions about them from people, as well as those critical degrees. So that's why I spent a little bit more extra time with it. All right, so we're going to then put Cancer on the ascendant. Now, if you have Cancer on the ascendant, you're putting this eclipse into the sixth house, which is a place, unfortunately, of accidents, injuries, and ill health. So is it possible that you're going to be dealing with a bit of a reboot in your life due to recurring health issues in the next 6 months or year? Yeah, it is. That would be one of the more challenging potentials for the Cancer rising folk out there right now. It could also mean that, look, it's, same thing in the first house. If you see health challenges in the sixth, sometimes you're also going to see the fighting spirit of the sixth come out and rise up to meet them. The sixth house was called the joy of Mars and the house of misfortune. It is a place that it is a place that calls out the warrior in us. It's a place that was associated with battles and wars and warriors and people who would die or sacrifice their lives for a cause, but also with toil and sweat and labor and servitude and slavery, as well as sickness and disease and hardships, conflict, or strife. It's a house where, you could see some challenges, and they could be in the life of a spouse or partner, or something like that, due to the dispositor Jupiter being in the seventh house. Now, that could mean that there are challenges, health challenges, not just for a partner, but for a partner or spouse's family. Just think, how does the potential for sickness or ill health or challenges come into my life through my spouse? And that could be not just through them literally, but through anyone or anything surrounding them. Now, that would be kind of, again, a really negative one, but you're looking at that fallen Jupiter in the seventh. Could indicate conflicts and turnover or change in relationships, but you could also see some kind of a moment of like hard work that pays off over time. I'm never ever surprised anymore when I see sixth house eclipses or big sixth house transits that imply a lot of hard work, blood, sweat, and tears, but eventually the work pays off. And we do have a little trace of that, if just to kind of encourage you a little bit, because we do see a trine from this eclipse to a very empowered Mars in the 10th house of career. So hard work paying off, is that a theme? How is that connected to also to marriage or business partners, with Jupiter, the ruler of the eclipse, in the 7th house of marriage? So I try to offer a little bit more here because I don't want it to sound too intense, but this is, eclipses in the 6th house will also signal, usually that's the period of time where like a body starts to break down a little bit with age. You get your 6th house eclipse years, past 40, and just almost predictably, you see people going through the times where things break down a little bit. And so something of your lifestyle has to change. Other times it's going to be significant challenges in your life that you have to rise up and face in order to be successful at something. I've heard lots of astrologers compare the 6th house to a place of apprenticeship before. I don't think that it's really the house of apprenticeship, but in terms of being in kind of a servile, hardworking, got to earn your way up type of place, that resonates. And what kind of meaningful conflicts come into your life? That's another 6th house theme. All right, so I'm going to go ahead now to Libra. Now, if you're a Libra rising, you're going to get this eclipse in your 3rd house. Now, the 3rd house is a funny house. It was called the joy of the moon, and it's called goddess. And it really is related to the environment that surrounds us every day, that's close to our roots, our community, our home, our culture, our family, our neighborhood, our siblings, our people that are like siblings to us, kith and kin, so to speak. And in that sense, it's also just like everything that's revolving around our immediate environment. The mind is like the immediate environment of the indwelling spirit soul. So there's this connection between the everyday environment and the constant fluctuations of the mind in the 3rd house. And when you see eclipses in this place, south node eclipses, you can really see people's minds starting to change, that there's some way of thinking that's being let go of or discarded. And also the potential for there to be sometimes unfortunately you can see death or loss of siblings, or death or loss of someone that's in your immediate sphere that has an impact. But usually I see things that have to do with a change of mind, a change of perception, a emphasis on changing means or modes of communication, including technology or media, learning something new, or starting to get really interested in something new intellectually. Those are the kinds of things that are pretty common. You could also see some emphasis on the topics of religion or spirituality and how they're on your mind. I've seen people walk away from, churches or religious communities with eclipses in the third house because they start questioning it. Or on the other hand, with the south node eclipse here, I would imagine that one could start a new line of inquiry, almost like the student who finally is ready, and so the teacher appears. The questioning mind finds answers. Those are things that I think could also happen. Now, this change in the environment, the reason I mentioned family is obviously if you're a Libra rising, the Jupiter changeover is happening. The culmination of that fall in Jupiter behind this eclipse is happening in your fourth house of home, family, and parents. So that's something else to keep in perspective. All right, now what we're going to do is put what do we have left? Capricorn on the ascendant. Now, this eclipse to me is the most otherworldly because you've got it in the 12th house, which is called the joy of Saturn, and which was already a very otherworldly place. Often very negative or very challenging things are associated with the 12th house, like imprisonment or hospitalization or disease, or again, slavery or sickness, or somehow being taken out of your element, feeling lost, wandering, confused, abandoned, alienated. But it's also this place where we get at a distance from the world. We get that 20,000 feet up perspective. Like the Hermit card in Tarot, that distance can give wisdom and healing. And the dark night of the soul leads most people, a lot of people who are into astrology anyway, and who have had such an experience, it leads us deeper into the life of the soul and spiritual practices in general. So this could be a really important turning point for you if you are a Capricorn rising. It can point to some potential health problems or things that make you feel like you're in no man's land. But this is a new beginning born of a deep personal change that's happening. And probably this personal change, it may have to do with, financial issues that are going to be coming up, or some kind of financial change that's about to happen with Jupiter and Saturn set to enter your second house. But also just, the fall in Jupiter in the first, like, are you ready to be over something or to get over something? Don't lose yourself trying to finish or complete something or rid yourself of a burden right now. Don't there could be a temptation to rush to complete something or get rid of something that's been personally weighing you down that could actually, get you into more trouble. And the reason for that, again, is Jupiter in its fall in the first, about to change signs. Like, you want that weight off from you, and Saturn too. But the 12th house eclipse in Sagittarius with the south node, don't try to escape. Don't try to cut corners. It'll lead to pain. All right. So now let's just, okay. So that's if you're a Capricorn rising, this 12th house is also, you could think of it as a midwifing space. It's an eclipse signifies something new here. Solar eclipse does. But the 12th house is the labor pains of, women when they're in labor, not yet given birth, but in labor. That contractive, you're not, you don't feel like you're, as my wife said, it's like a very otherworldly experience, and it's painful to give birth to something, but it's also beautiful. So that might be where you are for a little bit in 2021. For example, my dad's a Capricorn rising and just got out of a relationship, so he's like, he has to reset in the next 6 months, 12 months. So, it's stuff like that. It's like, you could just find yourself a little like, okay, like he's in a new apartment, by himself, and he's like, okay, I've got to like figure out my life. Like, that's the kind of 12th house eclipse stuff that we're dealing with right now, if you're a Cap rising. Okay. Now, let's go to the fixed signs. Okay, so we're going to start, actually, I'll start with Taurus. Okay, so if you are a Taurus rising, we're going to have all of these eclipses are going to be for the fixed signs will be in the succeedant houses. So if you are getting an eclipse in your eighth house, a new moon eclipse, I love this for getting rid of a debt or paying off a debt or just dealing with a fee, a penalty, a fine. Yeah, it might suck a little bit, but it somehow clears the slate. It's just like, okay, I've got to pay off my taxes, or, I owe someone money, or, and it could also, honestly, and unfortunately, this can be about receiving benefit from someone else through death, through an inheritance of some kind. This can also be about being free, feeling free, or getting free due to a debt being relieved. Don't try to escape from something by going deeper into debt. That would be a piece of advice for this one. Is the eighth house, the way that I see it in the broadest sense, is that it's a place of karmic entanglement with others, financially, emotionally, like that. So a new moon eclipse with a south node here feels to me like being freed from burdens, obligations, debts, but also the choice of where we might entangle ourselves going forward, what new debts, new relationships, new contracts or bonds we're going to share with other people, and are they wise or not? And this could be born, like if you're a Taurus rising, this could mean that there's also some shift from challenges that have been on your mind or heart with regard to religion, spirituality, politics, ninth house stuff with Jupiter culminating there, moving into your career house. So, what kinds of changes are you considering right now are going to go hand in hand with a very new chapter that's happening in your professional life if you're a Taurus rising? All right. Let's go ahead and put Leo on the ascendant. So if you're a Leo rising, this eclipse is going to fall into your fifth house, which was traditionally called the house of good fortune and the joy of Venus. It's a house that pertains to things like sex, pregnancy and children, and also really joyful things: creativity, sensuality, romance, pleasure. Whether, if you're going to go for a picnic in the park, go on a date, if you're going to go to a baseball game with friends, if you're going to a tavern to have a pint or something like that, this is fifth house stuff. It's broader than people think it is. Not just the house of creativity, it's the house of pleasure and recreation and joyful, pleasant things. It's also a house of good luck, like basically just good, nice, pleasant things happen. Well, if you're a Leo rising, this is a really nice eclipse for you because, in a sense, you're about to have Jupiter and Saturn move out of the sixth, which tends to be more of an ouchy place. It's harder. It's more of a grind. You're facing challenges. You're rising above them. You're sacrificing. Now they're going to move into the seventh, a place of, first of all, if it's moving on to the descendant in your seventh, then you're about to complete something in your life. And there's also an emphasis on new relationships, a new social dynamic in your life, something other or something that's coming in that you're making a deeper commitment to, either a person or some new thing or group. And this is going to bring a lot of joy into your life. Now, you have to be careful that this isn't, a cult or something that wants you to escape or be completely disembodied or, like that, because of that nature of the South Node. Be careful of hedonism or reckless indulgence or things like that as well. Could you be getting pregnant? Could you be having kids? Could your kids be leaving the house? Something new around your children could be happening as well. Okay, so let's go ahead and put Scorpio on the ascendant. So if you are a Scorpio rising, then the eclipse is falling in your second house. Pretty straightforward. It's about money. It's about finances. It's about purchases, expenditures, and income. It's about your own resources, what you have or what you're trying to cultivate or develop by your own hands and abilities. It's who you have to rely on that helps you with things like a personal, for example, in the second house was traditionally associated with your lawyer or your counselor or your therapist or anyone that's like this close, immediate resource to you. And this, so this is a new beginning around that area of resources. And, are you trying to start a new business or are you contemplating a change of investment of some kind? I wouldn't be surprised to see Scorpio risings buying a new home or starting to do something around home property or family building, family planning, financial planning for children or family, financial changes due to changes in the family, extended family, because Jupiter and Saturn are culminating and moving into the fourth house. Could there be a theme here of money that is being spent or used to help people around you, or have there been challenges with money due to things that are beyond your control, like COVID, for example, in the environment, and then you're looking at getting back to a place of financial stability with Jupiter and Saturn moving into the fourth, Jupiter ruling your second, a solar eclipse in the second. I like the look of this for a good turnaround financially. However, it could be born of dealing with or coping with losses as a part of the process. And that's the South Node nature in the second house. Or also downsizing, being like, I don't want to work as many hours, or I'm comfortable to not make as much money. Could be something like that too. Now, last but not least, we have Aquarius on the ascendant. Now, if Aquarius is in your ascendant, the eclipse is falling in your 11th whole sign house. And that puts it into the place of, it was called the joy of Jupiter, the house of good spirit, a place that's associated with anyone or anything that acts as a benefactor, people who are powerful or like good networking and allies in our life. It can be associated with groups, but not in some generic sense, in the sense of the groups of people that we belong to or associate with, usually in order to get help or for the sake of professional networking or to aid us in our ambitions or the causes that we believe in, stuff like that. So there's something new happening in that space, a social change of some kind happening. And I would imagine that it is happening as you are becoming more personally empowered or ready for some kind of personal makeover, because Jupiter and Saturn are about to enter your first house, which has the feeling of a new era born of a new identity, or something very personal that's happening for you where I'm going to start something, I'm becoming a new person. I'm pressing reset somehow, and it has this big ramification on, it has something to do with allies, friends, groups, benefactors, organizations, professional networks, things like that. So that's the look and feel of this eclipse. I like this for Aquarians in terms of just getting out of a maybe the past year or two. If you go back to December of 2017, when Saturn's been in your 12th house, has something been gestating for a while? Have you been in labor and is now the moment where you're ready for birth? That feels like the vibe for Aquarius risings. So that takes you through the 12 signs. Now, here's what I want to do last but not least. People have been asking me, well, what do you do if the nodes of the moon are returning to the same places versus if they are flipped? So I'm going to remove everything from the chart except for the nodes. Okay, so here's the deal is, there's going to be, people have different ways of reading this. Of course, if you're a modern evolutionary astrologer, you're going to have a very different approach to this. But let's just, I want to just take you forward to the angles and just give you an example with the angular houses. So let's say that you were born with the south node of the moon in the 10th house and the north node of the moon in the 4th house, where they are in this diagram. And let's say that the nodes of the moon are returning to these places. What you're going to see is an amplification of the karma that these nodes indicate in the birth chart, meaning it's just, and that's what a lot of astrology is. When transits come around, it's just amplifying or highlighting or saying this part of the birth chart will show up right now. So eclipses in the same signs that they were in when you were born, with the same order of the nodes in the same places, that's just going to say that karma's coming to blossom right now, big time. And then you have to understand what that means. If you have the south node in the 10th house, for example, there can be an emphasis. I have that one right on my midheaven, as it is in this picture, just in Aquarius for me. That will tend to amplify or emphasize that kind of otherworldliness or, potential around fantasy, imagination, spirituality. You also have to be careful of, let's just say the themes of escapism or dissociation or, drug use, that kind of detachment from the world. When it's in the 10th house, could that be something that has defined your career, or has it been something that's prevented you from having one? Do you know what I mean? You could kind of see it going either way. Now, for me, for example, with the South Node in that house, I have a very spiritual career, but I also earlier in my life struggled with opiate addiction. That was a big part of my story. Then I ended up using a psychedelic from the Amazon to help me get sober. And then I found yoga and so on and so forth. I was raised in the church, with an Aquarian father and mother who were, like church leaders. There's that South Node on the midheaven in Aquarius. So at any rate, if this were my chart, and it was like this, but the nodes were Sagittarius and Gemini, then you're going to see that emphasis of those elements of your career coming out. Whereas the North Node in the fourth house is going to speak to the more worldly ambitions that we have, the kinds of things that we're hungry to consume or achieve, or the ambitions that we wish to pursue, or the material things that we desire. So the North Node has much more of a hunger for worldly accomplishment, or it's more about going into the world and doing something or getting something. The South Node has more to do with sort of going away from the world. Now, if you think of the fourth house North Node, you're thinking about this karma in your natal chart is like, well, I want to, I want to buy land or property. I want to have a family. I want to expand my family. I want to have kids. You see what I mean? You're going to be hungry to develop or cultivate those things. If the nodes come around and they're synced up, then you're going to see the split between the kind of, let's say, the otherworldly career versus the material ambitions around home and family. There's some tension between those two things, but you're going to see that tension and those kinds of events and themes really powerfully when the nodes return in the exact same way. Okay, now let's say that you were to flip them. Let's say that you get the nodes coming into your 10th and 4th, but you have the North Node in the 10th in Sagittarius, and let's say you have the South Node in Gemini in the 4th. Okay, now what we're basically saying is that there's going to be halfway through the cycle, the normal orientation of those karmas is going to temporarily be flipped on its head. You're going to suddenly pursue more worldly status, wealth, achievement, etc. in your career, whereas usually you're more otherworldly, and there's going to be more detachment or dissociation around home and family, right? So and that's so when I had this come through, right? Just to give you an example, when I had a flipped nodal return coming through, I was focusing on my career and really going forward with it. And I was getting out, I was engaged and breaking off an engagement because I didn't want to start a home and family yet. Even though my North Node is in that house and it's something that my karma will tend to push me to want to do. So it'll flip and the orientation will change. Where there's usually a bit more detachment, otherworldliness, suddenly that area will become the one that you're more invested in with ambition for worldly gain or achievement or accomplishment of some kind. Whereas the other area where you're usually interested in worldly ambition will become the place where you feel like you want to go more otherworldly. I know that's a really simple formula. It might seem overly simple, but try it in your chart. You'll be amazed at how basic it can be. Now, I'll just use the example of the other angular houses just to show you. I can't go through all of the houses today, but now let's say that this is your normal ambition and otherworldly focus. And these are two ways of dealing with being in the karmic world. One is, let me find my happiness in it. The other one is, get me out of it, right? And neither are really the answer. As Krishna explains to Arjuna, you can't check out of the battlefield. And the point is also not just to win a worldly kingdom of wealth by winning a battle. Somewhere in between, there's yoga. So similarly, in our charts, the North Node in the first house, you say, okay, I really want to cultivate myself, my sense of, power, strength, my physique, my sense of individuality. Okay, I'm just like stereotypical first house stuff. Whereas the otherworldliness is going to come through romance, love, sex, marriage. There's going to be something that takes me out of myself and out of the world through marriage. Well, if you flip it, and then you say, okay, well, the South Node is going to come into Gemini in the first at some point, and the North Node into Sagittarius at some point. Then what you're doing is you're saying at that halfway moment through the 18-year cycle, that halfway moment will occur 9 years after the return, approximately. Then what you're saying is, okay, the ambition is now going to lie in the direction of marriage. Worldly ambition will come through partners or partnership, whereas I'm suddenly going to be, my sense of self and identity is not going to be the source of worldly ambition anymore. It's going to be something that, that's the time where you might see someone who's usually pretty self-focused in a more worldly manner, getting more interested in, well, who am I really? Maybe, maybe I'm a spirit soul wandering through the cosmos. Maybe, I want to step back and be in the background a little bit. Maybe I want a relationship and social dynamics to really take the center stage. You see what I mean? So this is a time when someone could get married because they suddenly say, I really want to invest everything and accomplish something through marriage in life. That's something I want to experience. And I'm going to sort of diminish something about myself temporarily, even though usually that's my focus of what I want to see enhanced. So that's how it flips. I hope that helps. If you like this, by the way, in my Kickstarter for the year, there's a series on the nodes of the moon that I'm doing, a series of talks that they're not available anywhere else. You can pick up if you want to go deeper with all of this. And I have a bunch of chart examples, and I talk about the history of the nodes in modern versus ancient astrology. It's a pretty cool series. All right. So that's what I have for today. I hope that this was interesting for everybody and helpful. I would love to hear, is this a nodal return for you or a halfway nodal return? How have you seen it play out in your life? If you are someone who was tracking this and can already see correlations to what's going on in your own life with the eclipses, in which house is it falling in your chart and what have you seen happening? It's really interesting to read people's stories. So thank you guys for sharing them. Don't forget, we're as of recording this morning, we're 6 backers away from breaking last year's record. If we do that, the stretch goal is, I don't know what. I mean, we'll be close to 700 backers and we're only halfway through. And so I guess my stretch goal is going to be, let's see if we can break 1,000. That would be 3 more backers with halfway to go, which would, I guess it would be less than 50% of what we've earned through the first half. So it seemed like a reasonable goal for a stretch goal. Can we get to 1,000 backers this year? If we break past it, I think that's going to be where I go. Let's see if we can get to 1,000 backers. I feel like I have just a really, really beautiful audience of people. Thank you guys for supporting me and my work. Hope to see some of you in class. I hope that you guys enjoy I try to give you something in return for supporting my work. So I hope that you enjoyed the different videos and things that I have available. And hope you're having a really good week and that this eclipse is overall a very positive thing for all of you. All right, take it easy, everyone.